I've spent 12 years in Blackwood Penitentiary. You learn to live with the noise here, the shouting, the rhythmic banging on bars, the constant hum of misery. But the real horror isn't the noise. It's the silence that comes after lights out. I was a wing orderly, which meant I stayed out later than the others to finish the floor cleaning. That's how I ended up being the only one near cell 402 the night the screaming stopped. Cell 402 had been empty for months. The official word was a plumbing issue, but everyone knew the real reason. 3 inmates had occupied that cell in a single year. The first one carved his own eyes out with a plastic spoon. The second one tried to swallow his own tongue. The third one just disappeared during a midnight head count, leaving nothing but a pile of neatly folded orange scrubs on an unmade bunk. It was a Tuesday around 1 a.m. I was mopping the hallway near the end of the block. The air in that section always felt 5 degrees colder, smelling of bleach and something else, something metallic, like old blood. I passed 402 and noticed the heavy steel door was slightly ajar. It shouldn't have been. I should have kept walking, but curiosity is a death sentence in a place like this. I pushed the door open. The cell was freezing. My breath hitched in my throat, forming a faint mist in the dim moonlight filtering through the slit of a window. The room was empty, except for a small, jagged hole in the corner of the concrete floor where the drain should have been. As I stared at the hole, I realized it wasn't a drain at all. It was a mouth. A perfectly circular opening lined with what looked like jagged, calcified teeth. I backed away, but the door slammed shut behind me. There was no handle on the inside. I pounded on the steel, but the sound didn't echo. It was swallowed by the room, as if the walls were made of velvet instead of concrete. That's when I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy, and it smelled of wet earth. I turned around. Standing in the corner was the man from the head count, the one who had disappeared. He was still wearing his orange scrubs, but they were tight, stretched over a body that had grown too long and too thin. His neck was elongated, tilted at a sharp angle, and his skin was the color of a bruise. He didn't have a face anymore. His features had been smoothed over like melted wax, except for a single vertical slit where his nose should have been. He didn't attack me. He just stood there, swaying slightly. Then, the vertical slit opened, and I heard my mother's voice. Not his voice, hers. She's been dead for 10 years, but I'd know that soft, trembling tone anywhere. She whispered my childhood nickname, the one nobody in this prison could possibly know. The man stepped closer, his movements jerky and mechanical. He reached out with fingers that had too many knuckles, pointing toward the hole in the floor. "It's hungry," my mother's voice whispered from his throat. "It's been waiting for someone who remembers what they did." I felt the floor start to soften beneath my feet. The concrete was turning into something organic, something that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic throb. I screamed, but no sound came out. The man leaned in until his smooth, featureless face was inches from mine. He opened the slit wider, and I saw rows of flat, human teeth inside. The next thing I remember is the morning guard found me passed out in the hallway. The door to 402 was locked tight. He laughed and told me I must have slipped on the wet floor. But when I got back to my own cell and took off my shirt, I saw them. Faint, blue bruises in the shape of long, multi-jointed fingers wrapped around my ribs. And in my pocket, I found a small, jagged piece of concrete that looked exactly like a human molar. I don't go near that wing anymore. But sometimes, when the prison goes quiet at night, I can hear the sound of something heavy dragging itself through the ventilation ducts above my head. And then, the whispering starts. My mother's voice, coming from the air vent, asking me if I'm ready to come home. Working in the prison laundry was a curse and a blessing. A curse because it was like a sauna that never ended, the air thick with steam and the metallic tang of blood from the uniforms. A blessing because the deafening roar of the industrial washers and dryers was the only place in the entire facility where you couldn't hear yourself think, or, in my case, where you couldn't hear the guards. It's also where men went missing. It started subtly. Every few weeks, someone would just vanish. Not from their cell, not from the yard, always from the laundry. Never a fight, never a scream, just gone. The official story was always a transfer, but nobody believed it. Not when their personal effects would turn up weeks later, meticulously folded and left on an empty bunk in a different cell block. My shift was usually from midnight to dawn. The laundry room was a cavern of chrome and steel, machines thundering like 100 captive beasts. We had a system. Dirty laundry came down from the upper floors via enormous metal chutes, landing in massive bins. Clean laundry went out on trolleys. Simple. Until it wasn't. One night, the main chute from B block jammed. It was a common occurrence, usually a tangled sheet. I grabbed a flashlight and a long pole and climbed onto the loading platform. The chute was a dark, narrow tunnel, reeking of stale detergent and something else. Something distinctly rotten, like old meat. I shone my light up. The jam wasn't a sheet, it was a man. He was stuck face down, his orange uniform torn. His body was unnaturally contorted, as if someone had twisted him into a pretzel. As my light hit him, I saw that his back was covered in deep, parallel gouges, like something had tried to climb him. I prodded him with the pole, trying to free him, but he was wedged tight. Suddenly, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from above him in the chute. It was a light, rhythmic, like fingernails on metal. I shone my light higher. Nothing, just the dark, greasy interior of the chute. I called out, "Hey, who's up there? The chute's blocked." The scratching stopped. Then, a low chuckle echoed down the metal tube. It wasn't human. It was dry and rattling, like stones in a tin can. And it was coming from directly above the stuck inmate. The man in the chute groaned, a low, guttural sound, and then his head slowly lifted. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a terror so profound it made my stomach churn. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Instead, a stream of thick, black tar dribbled from his lips. That's when I saw the hand. It was reaching down from the darkness above the inmate, a pale, spindly hand with fingers that were far too long and thin. It slowly wrapped itself around the inmate's exposed neck, gripping tightly. The inmate's legs began to kick wildly, slamming against the sides of the chute with dull thuds. I screamed, dropping my pole. The thing above didn't let go. It began to pull. Slowly, methodically, it dragged the inmate upwards into the pitch blackness of the chute. The man's body scraped against the metal, his struggles growing weaker. The last thing I saw was his wide, terrified eyes looking directly at me before he was swallowed by the darkness. I tried to call for help, but the roar of the machines was too loud. I ran out of the laundry room, gasping for air, the smell of rotten meat still in my nostrils. I found a guard, incoherent, rambling about what I saw. He just laughed it off, told me I was sleep-deprived. "Another transfer," he grunted. But the next morning, when they finally cleared the jam, they found no body. Only a single, neatly folded orange uniform resting on the bottom of the bin. And on the back of the uniform, stitched into the fabric, was a new name. My name. I don't work in the laundry anymore. I spend my days in my cell, staring at the ceiling. I hear the distant rumble of the machines, even through these thick walls. And sometimes, when the prison goes utterly silent in the dead of night, I can hear a faint, rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape coming from the air vent above my bunk. It's always accompanied by a dry, rattling chuckle. It sounds like something is trying to get out. Or maybe something is just trying to find a new place to put my uniform. The hole at Black Ridge wasn't like the regular isolation cells. It was built in the sub-basement, a place where the air was so old it felt like breathing dust. There were no bars, only a solid steel door with a sliding slot for food. No clock, no light, no sound. They put me there for 30 days after the riot. By day 10, I had memorized every crack in the floor. By day 15, the cracks started to move. It began with the cold, not just a draft, but a localized freezing point that sat right in the center of the cell. I would curl up in the corner, clutching my thin blanket, watching my breath plume in the dark. That's when the scratching started. It wasn't coming from the walls or the door, it was coming from the ceiling, directly above my head. Like something with very long, very sharp nails was trying to peel back the concrete. I shouted for the guards. I pounded on the door until my knuckles bled, but the slot stayed shut. The scratching grew louder, turning into a rhythmic, wet, tearing sound. I stared up into the pitch blackness, and for a split second, the ceiling seemed to ripple. A single, long, pale finger, white as a maggot and twice as long, poked through the solid stone. It wiggled for a moment, then withdrew, leaving no hole behind. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the center of the cell, my back against the wall, staring. Around 3 a.m., the temperature dropped so low the walls began to frost. And then a voice came from the darkness. It didn't come from a person, it came from the corner of the room, as if the shadows themselves were speaking. It was a perfect imitation of the warden's voice, authoritative, cold, and precise. 30 days is a long time, Miller, the shadow whispered. Long enough for your body to forget what it means to be solid. I saw a figure begin to manifest in the frost on the wall. It wasn't a man. It was a tall, spindly thing with limbs that looked like knotted rope. It didn't have a face, just a wide, lipless, horizontal slit that ran from ear to ear. As it stepped out of the wall, its feet made no sound on the concrete. It moved with a jittery, frame-by-frame motion, its head twitching from side to side. The creature leaned over me. I could smell it, a sickening scent of formaldehyde and rotting lilies. It opened its mouth, and instead of a tongue, I saw hundreds of tiny, translucent human hands reaching out, grasping at the air. It leaned in closer, and the warden's voice came out of that horrific mouth again. Do you know what happens to the men who don't come out of the hole? They don't die, they just thin out. The creature reached out and touched my forehead with one of its long, needle-like fingers. I couldn't move. I felt a sensation like ice water being injected into my brain. My memories, my mother's face, my first car, the smell of rain, they started to flicker and fade like a film reel melting in a projector. The creature was eating them. It was feeding on the things that made me, me. Every time it took a memory, the creature became more solid, more human-looking. Its skin began to tan, its limbs shortened. It was stealing my shape. I realized with a jolt of pure terror that when the door finally opened on day 30, I wouldn't be the one walking out. Something else would be wearing my orange scrubs, speaking with my voice, and living my life. I spent the next 2 weeks fighting for every thought. I repeated my name, my birth date, and my mother's maiden name over and over until my throat was raw. The creature stayed in the corner, watching me with those non-existent eyes, its mouth twitching in a silent laugh. It grew more like me every day. It even grew a mole on its cheek in the exact same spot as mine. On the final morning, I heard the heavy clank of the bolts. The door groaned open. The light from the hallway was blinding. I tried to stand, but I felt light, almost weightless, as if my bones had turned to glass. I looked toward the corner. The creature was gone. Or so I thought. The guard looked into the cell and frowned. "All right, Miller, time's up. Let's go." I walked out, but as I passed the guard, he didn't look at me. He looked through me. He walked right past me into the cell and helped someone else up. Someone who looked exactly like me, sounded like me, and even had the same scar on his chin. They led him away, and as he turned the corner, he looked back at me and winked. I'm still here. I'm still in the hole. The door is wide open, but I can't leave. I've become part of the frost on the walls. I'm just a shadow now, a pocket of cold air waiting for the next inmate to be thrown down here. And when they arrive, I'll be ready. I need a new face. I need a new life. And I'm very, very hungry.